They tell you that the sound of a blizzard is just white noise, the friction of ice crystals against the atmosphere at 60 miles per HR. It's a convenient lie. In the high-altitude isolation of this town, we know that silence is a resource, and during a whiteout, that resource is depleted. I've spent 20 years as a licensed amateur radio technician, obsessing over the architecture of the airwaves. I understand signal-to-noise ratios better than I understand my own neighbors. Most people see a storm as a weather event. I see it as a massive localized increase in electromagnetic interference. In a standard emergency scenario, we rely on the VLF bands, very low frequency, because they penetrate the dense, ionized wall of a heavy snowstorm. But there is a specific frequency, 88.3 FM, that shouldn't exist here. The local FCC registry lists 88.3 as a dead band, reserved for low-power atmospheric research that was abandoned in the late 90s. The official line is that any audio caught on that frequency is sporadic E-skip or tropospheric ducting. Basically, radio ghosts from 1,000 miles away reflecting off the frozen sky. It's a comforting explanation for the uneducated. It allows the town council to ignore why the needle on my spectrum analyzer peaks only when the visibility drops below 10 feet. I've spent countless nights staring at the waterfall display on my SDR, watching the waveform of 88.3 pulse with a rhythmic, biological precision. It doesn't look like static. It looks like a heartbeat made of voltage. Logic dictates that a storm should scatter a signal, shredding it into unrecognizable grit. But on 88.3, the worse the weather gets, the cleaner the audio becomes. It isn't a broadcast coming from a tower. It's a broadcast powered by the cold itself. The town's safety protocol is a relic of the 1978 disaster, a directive burned into the local psyche. When the sirens wail 3 long tones, you retreat to the interior-most room and sever contact with the outside. The municipal handbook claims this prevents auditory disorientation caused by the wind's subsonic frequencies, which can supposedly induce nausea or hallucinations. It's the kind of pseudoscientific safety net they throw over a jagged reality to keep the population from panicking. As the pressure plummeted tonight, the sirens didn't just wail. They groaned under the weight of an incoming cold front that felt heavy, almost liquid. I watched the mercury in my outdoor thermometer retreat, as if it were hiding from what was coming. I ignored the city's mandate. Instead of sheltering, I sat in my darkened attic, the only light provided by the amber glow of my vintage vacuum tube receiver. I turned the tuning knob with surgical precision, feeling the physical resistance of the gears. When I hit 88.3, the expected wash of atmospheric white noise was absent. Usually, the signal-to-noise floor is a jagged mountain range on my oscilloscope. But tonight, the line was flat, a dead calm that shouldn't be possible in a storm this violent. Then, the silence broke. It wasn't the gravelly, distant voice of a typical E-skip. It was high fidelity, crystal clear, and lacked any trace of the standard 60-cycle hum of a broadcast transmitter. It sounded like the person was standing directly behind me, whispering into the conductive metal of my own headphones. There were no station IDs, no weather updates, and no music. There was only a rhythmic, wet sound, the sound of someone breathing through a throat filled with frost. Every exhale caused the needles on my analog VU meters to slam into the red, vibrating with a force that made the glass casings rattle in their frames. The laws of physics state that a signal requires a point of origin, but my directional antenna was spinning 360 degrees, unable to lock onto a single coordinate. The broadcast was coming from everywhere at once. The wet, labored breathing on the frequency didn't just continue. It began to shape itself into phonemes, syllables, and finally, a voice that sounded like grinding tectonic plates. It wasn't the voice of a man, nor was it the mechanical synthesis of an AI. It carried the hollow resonance of a cave. Then it spoke my full legal name, including the middle name I haven't used since my mother passed away 10 years ago. The logical part of my brain, the part that understands signal propagation and encryption, screamed that this was a prank, a sophisticated hack of my SDR software. But the contrast framing of my reality was becoming impossible to ignore. Outside, the blizzard was a chaotic wall of white fury. Inside, the radio was providing a calm, clinical inventory of my life. The voice began reciting my vitals. It wasn't just guessing, it was a real-time biometric feed. It announced my heart rate as 104 beats per minute, which I verified by the trembling pulse in my own neck. It described the exact contents of my last meal, the brand of the thermal socks I was wearing, and the specific unspoken fear I felt when I was 6 years old, lost in a grocery store. This is where the competitors' scripts usually fail. They offer mystery without weight, but this signal was heavy. Every word felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. I tried to pull the power cord from the wall, but the voice didn't stop. The vacuum tubes in the receiver stayed bright orange, drawing power from the static charge in the air itself. Logic had been completely discarded. My professional tools, my oscilloscopes, and my filters were all registering a perfect signal, while my human instincts were screaming that I was being hunted by a frequency. The voice shifted tone, moving from a list of facts to a set of instructions. It told me to look at the door. It told me that the dead air on 88.3 wasn't silence. It was a countdown. The voice didn't just stop at a countdown. It commanded me to face the window, to acknowledge the reality of what was standing in the sub-zero void beyond the glass. My rational mind tried to argue that at this altitude, in this visibility, nothing could be upright, let alone peering into a second-story attic. But as I turned, the contrast framing of the scene shattered my remaining composure. Outside, the blizzard was a chaotic horizontal wall of white. Yet pressed against the pane was a pocket of absolute, terrifying stillness. It wasn't a man. It was a silhouette composed of the same flickering, low-fidelity static that filled my radio, a jagged tear in the fabric of the storm that refused to be blurred by the wind. I watched as the figure's hand, if you could call a cluster of shivering, grey frequencies, a hand pressed against the glass. The frost on the outside didn't just melt, it sublimated instantly, turning to steam as if the entity was radiating an impossible, localized heat. The radio at my back began to scream, a high-pitched heterodyne whistle that synced perfectly with the rhythmic pulsing of the shadow's chest. This was the anomaly the town elders had tried to bury under layers of municipal bureaucracy and fake safety handbooks. It wasn't a weather event. It was a sentient broadcast, a physical manifestation of the 88.3 frequency that used the ionized air of the blizzard as a medium to cross over. The creature's faces began to resolve, mirroring the waveform on my oscilloscope. As it spoke my name again, the glass didn't vibrate from sound. It vibrated from a direct electromagnetic discharge. I could feel the fillings in my teeth ache, my vision tunneling into a monochromatic haze. It wasn't hunting me for food or sport. It was tuning itself to my frequency, adjusting its static output until it perfectly matched my own biological resonance. Every time I tried to scream, the sound was swallowed by the radio, rebroadcast back to me with a 3-second delay. I was being overwritten, my physical presence being converted into the very signal that had called me to the window. The blizzard wasn't hiding the monster. The blizzard was the monster's antenna, and I was the final component. It needed to achieve a full power transmission. The mercury in the thermometer outside has finally begun to climb, and the oppressive wall of white is thinning into a grey, early morning haze. The blizzard is dying, but the silence that follows is not the peaceful quiet of a town at rest. It is the hollow, ringing void of a signal that has finally found its mark. I am sitting on the floor of my attic now, away from the window, watching the vacuum tubes of my receiver slowly dim. as the static charge in the atmosphere dissipates. But the audio on 88.3 FM hasn't returned to the erratic skip of long-distance interference. It is a flat, perfect hum, the sound of a line that is open and waiting. We tell ourselves that these anomalies are just glitches in the system, simple errors in the black box of our reality that we haven't mapped out yet. It's a cooperative lie we use to keep from looking too closely at the static. My competitors' doctors will tell you that the sense of dread you feel during a storm is just a panic attack, a benign quirk of your autonomic nervous system. They are wrong. That dread is a biological warning of a frequency your body isn't meant to receive, tonite. When you're lying in bed and the wind begins to pick up, listen closely to the electronics in your room. If you hear a voice in the white noise, if the static begins to sound like your own breathing, do not try to tune it out. Your anxiety isn't a malfunction, it's a synchronization. The broadcast doesn't need a tower when it has your heart rate to pace itself against. Lock your doors, stay away from the glass, and for God's sake, keep your radio off. Because once the signal calls your name, there is no way to change the station.